Thank you, James. Glad to be partnered up in hosting such an amazing event. John O'Sullivan is an internationally known TEDx speaker and the founder of the Changing the Game project, which he started in 2012. He's the author of 2 #1 best-selling books, Changing the Game and Every Moment Matters, and leading youth sports blogger. He's the host of the Way of Champions podcast, one of the top-rated podcasts in the world for coaches, former collegiate and professional soccer player, and has coached for over 20 years on the youth, high school, and collegiate level. He's consulted with the U.S. Olympic Committee, U.S. Soccer, USA Football, U.S. Lacrosse, USA Swimming, Ireland Rugby, Aussie Rules Football, and many more. He's on the National Advisory Board for the Positive Coaching Alliance and the National Association for Physical Literacy. For those of you that just joined us, we asked that everyone mute their microphone so that we can continue with the presentation. I'll start with my first question for Mr. O'Sullivan. Oh, and for those that have questions, please direct them to James Presturis. If you can type them in the chat box, he'll direct them to me so we could ask them at the end. Mr. O'Sullivan, can you just start us off with telling us a little bit about how you started the Changing the Game project and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, sure. And thank you all for being here and having me on. As you can tell from my window, I live in the West Coast now, but I'm an original New Yorker. Grew up on Long Island. I went to college at Fordham, and then I left the jurisdiction 20 something years ago. But yeah, so I was after I got done playing, I coached college soccer for a couple years, and then youth, and moved out here to the West Coast, and was really kind of burnt out with a lot of the politics and the things that go on, and decided to kind of step back from coaching, and wrote my first book back in 2012, 2013 called Changing the Game, which was really about the things that I had learned in 20 something years of coaching, and painting my own, parenting my own kids in sports, and a lot of kids that I had coached that had gone on to play in, the Europa League in soccer, and gone to World Cups, and played pro and played in college, and what was their path like. And so I started this organization, Changing the Game project, back then. Led to a TED Talk, which I think is how I connected with James. Then podcast about 3 years ago. We're about to hit episode 200 here in the next few weeks. And I just published a second book just about a year ago for coaches. And so now on the podcast, I get to talk to athletes and coaches and sports scientists and authors and all interesting people about, how do we build culture? How do we coach? How do we help our kids do their very best? And, from an athlete perspective, how do you truly get to the top from people who have been there? So that's kind of my day job.
Oh, super interesting. And then on those points of just everything you've been writing about in your books, what's the biggest issue that you've seen plaguing youth sports today that you just kind of see at all levels of the game?
Well, like if we step back from what we're all experiencing with COVID and stuff, I think the biggest issue I think is we get so focused on the moment in front of us. And what I mean by that is that youth sports is this journey. And as a parent, we get these 10, 12 years that our kids are in sport. And we have to look at that whole journey. We have to look at that from above and really think about, well, when my son or my daughter is 20 or 22 or 24, what is the kind of human being that I would like them to be? And then work backwards from there. And then when you do that, what happens is you get less concerned with this moment in front of me when my kid just got cut or got benched or didn't get to wear her favorite number or the coach yelled at her or something like that, because we see this as part of the journey. And so even as a parent myself, my kids are in middle school, or I have a high school freshman and an 8th grader. And, when something happens, I look at it and I'm like, oh man, I want to react to it. And then I have to take that step back and say, what, this is a big, long journey. What can we learn from this? What's good about this moment here? And every day, just like all of you, I have conversations with my kids, or I have conversations with the kids that I coach who are struggling, who are losing confidence, or who are having a bad time. And, I screw up plenty of those conversations, and sometimes I get them right. So I think that's really the biggest thing that I can say. And then because of we lose sight of that journey, then all of a sudden we try to throw money at problems that money can't fix, and we focus on sometimes the wrong things, or where we lose patience with our kids as they grow up and they change, and so a lot of things come from not beginning at the end.
Definitely. So on that same point, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see that coaches are making?
I mean, it just depends. I think professional sport is a terrible example for youth coaches for how we should coach. And what I mean by that is that, we get these snippets on ESPN, I mean, professional sports and even big time college sports, that's that's sport for entertainment, right? And if we're in youth sports, we're in the sport for development space. And so we have to take a very different approach to, uh, did we win? Now, what we work with the teams that we work with and stuff is like there's no magic formula. You can't teach winning, but what you can do is you can teach competing, and you can create an environment where people compete their very, very best. And when you compete, um, then and you do it day after day, and you act the right way and you behave the right way, good things happen. But when you focus on winning and that's the only thing that matters, well, now how can we shortcut, right? How can we cut the development process so that we win today? So in my sport of soccer, right, I can win all my 9-year-old soccer games if I just find kids who will, find one fast kid to stand up front and kick balls over the top, right? In basketball, if I want to play a full court press from age 7, yeah, I can win a lot of games because the people are going to turn balls over and stuff like that. And so I think it's really, again, as a coach, well, what are my long-term goals? And am I trying to, raise the best 10, have the best possible 10-year-old player? Or do I want to make sure that this kid is the best 18-year-old basketball player or soccer player? And if that's the case, then I have to do things a little bit differently today to do that.
Oh, of course. And then if that's the case, what's the best way for us to educate our parents and coaches to help minimize these issues?
Well, I think first of all, we're all partners in this, right? Like if we think about sport development as this three-legged stool, and we have the kids, right? And we have coaches and we have parents. If you remove a leg, the stool falls apart. And so I think what's really important is that we remember that we're all partners. Now, far too often we use the bad parents as an excuse not to engage the good ones, right? There's great parents out there, and most of them love their kids. Probably if you've taken the time to be on here, unless your spouse forced you to be on here, right? Then all of a sudden, you're probably here for the right reasons and you love your kids. And just because we love our kids doesn't mean we don't screw up once in a while. Um, as coaches, getting attached with like, why do I coach? Right? Why am I here? Why do I do this? I don't think it's to collect $10 trophies. So helping coaches constantly re-engage with their purpose, and then you know what? Like ask the kids, what do they want out of this? And I think this is especially important right now during COVID, where, I know like New York City, and I don't know how that affects these families, has had kids in school and then kids out of school and kids back to school. I mean, my own kids here in Oregon are not going to school. So the kids that I coach in sports, their only social outlet of the week are the 3 times we get together. And so I have to be really, really attentive to the fact of like, you know, they are not seeing friends all day. And so maybe there's some things that I wish we could get done soccer wise that we're not going to get done today, because I have to make sure that these kids are just, engaged and running around and smiling and laughing and talking to their friends, because, this is a really tough time now. And so I think these are the kind of things that as a club, right, you want to go from being transactional. hey, you pay us money, we teach basketball or whatever, to like transformational, right? We want to develop better people, and we want to help you through the trials and tribulations of being a parent of a young man or a young woman, because it's not easy. And as coaches, we know that you need a good, positive outside voice when your kids don't want to listen to you. And if we do all those things, I think we become a club that develops a lot of loyalty, and people want to continue being a part of, versus just we teach basketball.
Of course, that's super important. And on that same note, if we kind of take it over to the parent side, what do you think are some do's and don'ts for parents that what they should do or maybe avoid doing with their kids, either before, during, or after a game? And how would that be different?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if I had to put, if you put the finger on one thing as a parent, when they ask children who are done with sports, what's your worst memory of sports? It's often the ride home after the game. Right? It's the ride home after, because, you know, right, your kids are physically and emotionally exhausted. And as the parent, you're emotionally exhausted. And then you got them locked in the car, right? And you're stuck in traffic. And you're going to make this a teachable moment. And what our kids tell us a lot is that oftentimes this is the least teachable moment out there. It's not a teachable moment. Now, every kid's different, right? So some kids, like when I was growing up, and I'd be, you know, driving back to Long Island from the Met Oval or something, I'd, you know, be like, you know, hey, Dad, how did I do? But like that question never once occurred to my brother, right? He didn't want to talk to my dad in the car. And with my own kids, my daughter will always ask me how'd I do. My son, he's all, the only thing he wants to know is what's to eat right now. And so I think these are really important things that we look at our son or our daughter and recognize, like, what do they need in this moment? What is their emotional state? And if they bring it up, we can have a conversation about it. But if we force that conversation in that emotional time right after a tough loss, oftentimes we don't teach them anything, and they end up angry at us and we end up angry at them, and nothing comes out of this. And so I think one of the biggest things we can do as parents is be really self-aware of our own emotions, and am I capable of having a productive conversation? And if the answer is no, then don't have it. Like, have it over dinner, have it in the hotel that night, have it the next morning over breakfast, have it when your son or your daughter brings it up, and that's probably a far better time to have it, and far more productive. And then that car ride home becomes a place where it's like, ah, now I've coached almost 30 years, and I can tell you the kids who get the 10th degree on the way home, because when they're having a bad game and there's 15 minutes left, they start playing worse and worse, and they start looking to the sideline, and they start anticipating this awful drive home after. Right? So if you want your kids to perform their best, then make sure that that time after the game is their time, not our time to teach. I think that would be the biggest, most impactful thing you can do.
No, I love that. In your TED talk, you had mentioned about how telling your kid, I love watching you play, is the greatest thing you could tell them. Can you talk a little bit about that message and why that's so important?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't take any sort of claim for making that up. I mean, I'm sure it's in the Bible or something like that. Like, this is an old concept, but just helping your kids understand that, like, conditionally, no matter what, my love for you is never dependent on whether you won or lost or how it goes in sports. And I don't think anyone would be on here doing that, saying, I don't love my kid this week. I might be frustrated with you, but I love you. And so just that, like, understanding that, okay, you know what, it wasn't your week. Let's move on. I mean, here's what I do. I when I have that post game conversation, I always say three things, right? What went well today? What needs work, and what can we learn from today that we can work on in practice this week? And your kids are all on a journey, and no one's getting drafted in the next week or two or next year. And so they all have something that's going well, and they all have something that needs work, and they all probably have something that, like, you know, you can come up with a plan of, like, hey, let's focus on this week, right? Your defending wasn't really good, or, you know, getting your head up more, or things like that. Like, let's get a little bit better. And that way, if they had a terrible game, something still went well. And if they had a great game, something still needs work. And then you just have this consistent conversation that makes them think at a little deeper level about it.
And it's interesting because I realized how a lot of parents might confuse this and associate a philosophy like this, which is so supportive, but mistakenly confuse it with the era of participation trophies. Can you talk about a little bit on that and how it's very different from that?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to this idea that winning and competing are not the same thing, and I'm as competitive as they get, and certainly have as a coach and as an athlete before that, no one would say, "Oh, John's not a competitive guy," but I mean, here's the problem, especially in coaching or in parenting, is that when our kids struggle, um, we tend to look at their struggles as like a direct reflection of our parenting. Or as a coach, if I haven't come to terms with why did I stop playing? I haven't come to terms with the end of my playing career, and then I bring all that baggage into coaching, and then I take it out on kids. And so um, I, I think we always want our kids to compete and do their very best. And if they do that, they're going to win, and sometimes they're going to lose. But I think youth sports especially is about, like, I'm not teaching this, the technical and tactical stuff takes a back seat to behaviors. And what I mean by behaviors is, right, am I respectful? Am I coachable? Do I work hard? Do I, play with integrity? Do I compete every day? Am I willing to be held accountable? Do I treat my teammates well? These are all the behaviors. And if we get these behaviors right, and we show up enough days in a row with full focus, full effort, full accountability, full competitiveness, and we do that enough times, we're going to be really good and we're going to win some games. But if we don't get the behaviors right and we get away with stuff because we're a little bit bigger or stronger or faster, eventually everyone else catches up. Right? There was this great there was this great thing making the rounds on LinkedIn yesterday that came across my path, and it was sort of, the whole idea was like, there's always someone bigger and better. And the first picture was a picture of The Rock, the actor, standing with Kevin Hart. And The Rock is huge compared to Kevin Hart. And then the second picture was The Rock standing next to Shaq, and Shaq was huge. And then the third picture was Shaq standing next to Yao Ming, and Yao Ming is so much bigger than him. And so there's always someone bigger, right? So we can teach our kids, like, hey, you know what? Figure out how to win without being faster, without being stronger, because you're probably not going to be faster and stronger forever. And I think these are the type of things that, if we do that enough, that's competing. And when we compete, right, we have more confidence because we only focus on the things that we control. When we focus on winning, there's referees, there's opponents, there's weather, there's all these things that are out of our control that all of a sudden we lose confidence. So I don't believe in participation awards. I think they're a waste of money. I'd rather see that money go to scholarships, and I don't think kids need participation awards to participate. What I'd like to see is this focus on values and behaviors that play really well in life. I think youth sports organizations can do a better job with that.
Of course, and I'd just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you could either write them in the chat or direct them to James Pastoris, and we'll make sure to get them answered. One more question that we had is, we obviously discussed a lot about what our parents and coaches can do, but there are a lot of athletes in this call. What's some advice for them when they're dealing with an overbearing parent or coach, for them to kind of be able to push through that?
When they're dealing with what, John? Sorry, I didn't hear the end of your question.
An overbearing parent or coach, then it's out of their control.
Yeah. So for those of you who are still playing, I mean, enjoy it, love it, play, but take ownership of your experience. So as a parent, when I see my own kids not own something, whether it's practice or school or whatever, that's when I want to step in. So if you find like your mom or your dad is stepping in a lot, well, you got to show that you own this and that you love this and that this is your experience and your journey. not theirs. And then, the other thing, I just did a podcast a couple weeks ago with Martin St. Louis, who played for the Rangers at the end of his career, and NHL Hall of Famer. And I've known Marty for like 20 years. And one of the things he said to me, he said, "What was it about you that made you who you were as a player?" And he said, "I was just really good at getting better. I was just really good at getting better." And I think that's like the best advice that I could ever give to an athlete, in terms of just be really good at learning, be really good at getting a little bit better every day. And if you're good at that and you do that enough, you're going to be the best player that you're capable of becoming. Um, but there's too many people who have, quote, talent, but they're not good at getting better. And so they go and they work on the things that they're already good at, instead of working on the things that need work. They work on their strong hand instead of their weak hand. They work on some aspect of the game that's a great strength, and that's fine. But also work on the things that need work. Get strong when you need to get strong. Get fit when you need to get fit. And so that's my advice to anyone here listening in. Like, coaches love people who are really good at getting better. And because that's infectious, and it helps your teammates want to get better too. Those are the type of people that I want on my teams. And so be that type of person, and you'll find a pathway in the game for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. And we also got a great question from Mr. Petru. And it's also reminded everyone, keep sending those questions in so we can get them out there and asked by Mr. O'Sullivan. But what do you do when the best player on your team is the kid with the worst sportsmanship? How should a coach approach that?
I mean, it's such a good question, because again, there's so many parts to that. Number one, sometimes we use uh, professional sports the model and say, "Oh, look at Dennis Rodman," or whatever, right? But that's professional sports. So this goes back to this idea of behaviors, right? If I'm a coach and a kid shows up with that attitude, lack of sportsmanship, lack of respect for teammates, it's not my fault how he or she shows up. But I would say that it is your responsibility how they leave. And I think we have too many kids, and too many kids that we identify as talented when they're young, that just get away with stuff because they have ability. And I think talent is not just ability, it's ability times those behaviors done over and over. Because eventually that kid with the bad attitude, like why is a 10-year-old, your best player? Is it because he's taller than everyone or stronger than everyone? But if he doesn't know how to work hard, if he doesn't know how to get better, if he's not coachable, if he's not a good teammate, someone better is going to come along and take his spot. And so I think we do kids a huge disservice when we ignore those bad behaviors, because he still gets the job done. And so I think one of the most important things we can do, if whoever asked that question, if you're a coach, you have to have standards, right? And your standards are your bumpers in your team. This is how we do things here. And everyone who's part of this group has to live within the standards. And as a club and as a director, I have to back up my coaches who say, this kid, he's really good, but he's not making the standard right now. The way he treats people, the way he talks to referees, the way he treats other, and we won't move you on. And you have to be okay with that as a club, and you have to be okay with that as a coach, that people who refuse to meet the standard of how we do things here, maybe they're just not a good fit. And when they're young kids, it's our job to try to change that. But oftentimes they're like that because maybe their parents are like that, and their parents aren't going to back you up on that. And sometimes then it's just a better opportunity for them to go play someplace else if they won't get on board. But don't compromise your principles and what you believe, um, to let someone who, quote, has talent slide by. Because if you get that kid on board and you get him or her working hard and showing a good attitude, your team's going to get so much better. But if you let it slide, right? If you don't condemn it, you're condoning it, and other people are going to slide as well.
Awesome. And then we also off that same point, then what would, because that's great advice for our coaches. Is there similar advice that you give to a parent that is dealing with the same issue where their son or daughter is incredibly gifted at the sport they're playing, but they keep on trying to get this message of sportsmanship across and it's not getting through?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I would ask John, like I would ask you or anyone, like how do you define gifted? Like what's gifted?
That's a good question. It would be in the sense of the question, more so based on the athletic ability in the sport itself, in terms of winning games, scoring, having those characteristics that lead to a positive outcome in the game.
Yeah. Okay. Again, what we're talking about when we use the word gifted is what we can see in front of us, which we might call ability. Um, but let's be 100% honest here. When we are talking about children who have not gone through puberty yet, so let's say, 14 and under for girls and 16, 17 under for boys, when we often confuse ability with maturity. And what I mean by that is there's this thing in sport called the relative age effect, and it's in schools as well, where kids who are born within 2, 3 months of whatever your arbitrary calendar cutoff date is are usually going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit older, a little bit stronger. And all of a sudden, we start calling them exceptional. We start calling them gifted when actually all they are is older. And if you shifted that calendar date, right? If your cutoff date is January 1st, you got this kid born January 10th, and you're going, man, look at her. She's got everything. And all of a sudden you shifted the date to February 1st, and she's now the youngest in the age group. You're very unlikely to be saying, wow, she's incredible. Look at her. You'd be like, man, maybe we can find a spot for her on the B team. Right. So that arbitrary date has been proven in every single sport to have a huge effect on selection and what we identify as gifted when we're really young. So if I'm a parent and I see my son or my daughter doing really well, I really need to get to the bottom of why are they doing well. Now, if they're spending 20 hours a week practicing and they're loving it and they are into this, man, that's great. Then, these are important skills to learn as well, right? Like working well with others, being a great teammate. These things are huge. When I went to Fordham, I went with there was a basketball player all 4 years of mine there called Sherwin Content, great guy, and he went to Christ the King. And I forget some of the guys that he played with in high school, but they were like the number one team in the country. And I think Sherman scored like 10 points his whole entire high school career. And then he scored like 2,000 in college. Right. And like, what an incredible thing. Like, what was his role on his high school team? He was a great basketball player, but he was a heck of a teammate. And all of a sudden he got to college and they gave him the ball. What if he was a lousy teammate? Right? What if he said, no, I need to shoot. I need to do this all the time. He wouldn't have been part of a number one team in the nation. He wouldn't have been part of a state champ. He wouldn't have been a Division I basketball player. So I think it's really important as a parent that we're showing our kids that these human skills matter a ton. And where they really matter is not just like on the basketball court. Like, these things play really well in life too. So, sport is just this great place to be able to teach these things when the consequences aren't really all that high.
Oh, thank you so much, John. And can you remind everyone in the audience of what the best way is to connect with you?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, the website is changingthegameproject.com. Uh, you can find all Twitter, CTG Project HQ, and all that. The podcast called Way of Champions, and you can find that on Apple and Stitcher and Spotify and all the places. And then, my books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the places that you might find a book or an audiobook as well.
That's fantastic, John. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Is that it? No more questions?
Anyone have any more questions before John goes?
I saw some commentary in, I believe, Greek, but I don't read Greek. So whatever you said about me, I hope it was nice.
Anyway, thank you, John. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate everyone else taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us. If there's any other topics you'd like us to discuss in the future, please reach out to me. Let me know. Everyone have a good night and hope to see everyone soon. Stay safe.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Γεια σου, Ηλία.
Thanks, James.
Γεια σου, Ηλία, από το Brooklyn.
Leah doesn't know how to direct message.
I'm messaging him privately. He's answering publicly.
Γεια σου Κώστα. Κωστάκη.
Γεια σου, Ηλία. Πώς είσαι?
Καλησπέρα.
Μιλάμε μετά, ρε. Άντε.
See you guys.
Later, Costa. Thank you, man.